From June 2017 to June 2018, 4 equally strange cases occurred in the quiet coastal village of São Jacinto. 4 elderly female neighbors aged 78 to 87 years, who lived in houses only 70 meters away from the property of Eugenia L., the former owner of a funeral business, suddenly died with the diagnosis of heart blockage. The investigators initially paid no attention to these events, as advanced age always brings certain risks, but very soon the picture took on a completely different character. The investigators, who questioned neighbors and carefully examined the crime scenes, noticed a strange coincidence. On the nightstands of all 4 women stood cups with remains of chamomile and lemon balm tea. Laboratory tests confirmed. The beverage contained no foreign chemical substances. Disturbing, however, was that witnesses had seen Eugenia, the 91-year-old neighbor of the deceased, on the evening before each tragedy, going to them with a thermos in her hand. An additional disturbing element was the data from the local sawmill, São Roque. Eugenia had placed 5 orders for boards of specific size in the last year and a half, 125 by 45 centimeters. According to her words, these were lids for potato boxes. The pensioner paid for all orders in cash and had them delivered directly to her shed, which almost no one entered. In the first phases of the investigation, the police focused on 2 people. The first was Nuno S., Eugenia's nephew and her only heir. The 47-year-old man appeared repeatedly in the village. However, his relationship with his aunt was strained. Nuno had a long history of gambling and financial problems. Therefore, he could well have a motive. The second was the local paramedic Henrique C. It was he who had been called 3 times at night to the deceased women and had made the same diagnosis in each case: sudden heart blockage. Nevertheless, the investigation quickly exonerated Henrique. He was a respected man with an impeccable reputation, and his conclusions were confirmed by experts from the city hospital. Thus, the police's attention temporarily focused exclusively on Nuno. Initially, it seemed to the investigators that they were on the right track. A fisherman who lived near the pier told the police with certainty that on the evening before the second tragedy, he had seen Nuno's car, an old Renault sedan, parked near the house of one of the deceased. Initially, this seemed to be convincing evidence. However, checking the surveillance recordings from the gas station, which was 3 kilometers from the crime scene, completely refuted the fisherman's statements. At the time when the car was allegedly noticed at the pier, according to his statement, Nuno was refueling his car at a completely different location. This false lead had to be closed and switched to other details that could shed light on the matter. At the time of completing the first investigation phase, the police received crucial information from the sawmill São Roque. The records showed that Eugenia not only ordered strange lids that resembled coffin lids, but did so with a regularity that coincided amazingly with the time of her neighbors' deaths. Now the investigators were absolutely certain that the mystery was hidden in Eugenia's shed. Soon the search warrant was also ready, which was supposed to reveal the main secret. But while the investigation carefully prepared for the search, Eugenia herself remained the only one who knew the truth. Could Nuno physically be present in the village on the dates when the mysterious events took place? The investigation in the case of the 4 women from São Jacinto dragged on for years. Eugenia's nephew, Nuno SM, was the main suspect for a long time. However, after the first check of his car, the police partially loosened control over him, believing that the case might lie somewhere nearby but not directly with him. Nevertheless, a new wave of verification initiated 5 years later due to additional requests from the prosecutor's office forced the police once again to examine in detail the nephew's lifestyle and movement patterns. The investigators understood that Nuno's alibi in 2018 looked reliable but superficial. To definitively exclude his involvement, the investigation began to carefully check details and records of recorded movements. Nuno had been working for many years at a metallurgy plant in Porto. This is a large company with a modern access control system, where all employee movements are recorded both through access cards and through 24-hour video surveillance. The police requested the plant's pass log for the dates when the tragic events took place. The The plant's response was categorical and documented. Nuno was at his workplace and completed a 12-hour uninterrupted shift on each of the dates. He entered the plant premises and registered his pass at 20 o'clock and left exactly at 8 o'clock the next day. Videos from surveillance cameras confirmed that he could not physically leave the plant premises unnoticed. The investigators did not trust exclusively the plant documents and expanded the verification. The Via Verde service, Portugal's automatic road toll system, confirmed that Nuno's car was recorded several times on the A1 toll road between Porto and Lisbon. However, the time of recording his Renault's license plates did not match the suspected time of events in the village. Particularly on the day of one of the tragedies, the car was registered at 23 hours 8 minutes when leaving Porto and at 5 hours 47 minutes on the return trip. This data completely excluded the probability that Nuno could have been in São Jacinto, considering road logistics and the timeline of events. The investigators nevertheless posed a technical question. Could Nuno leave his workplace at least for a short time, say for 3 hours, to make a quick visit to the village? They received the answer after re-examining the plant's video recordings. Every minute of his shift was captured by video cameras, and all movements outside the workroom required passage through control points registered by access card. Thus, the version of the nephew's short-term disappearance was absolutely impossible. A separate subject of verification remained the video recording from the registrar at São Jacinto Pier, where on one of the nights a Renault sedan was noticed that closely resembled Nuno's car. The investigators decided to check this fact as well, especially after the witness's statement that he had seen the car at the crime scene. Upon repeated magnification of the footage, police experts clearly established that the car's license plates differed from Nuno's Renault license plates. The car in the recording was of the same brand but belonged to a completely different person who simply parked at the pier, which caused the original confusion. At this time, the police received a new and extremely important clarification from the accounting department of the sawmill São Roque. Initially, it was assumed that the mysterious orders for lids reminiscent of coffin sizes could be paid for by Nuno to hide Eugenia's involvement. However, checking the financial documents clearly showed that each order was issued to Eugenia herself. The suspicions that the nephew could act as an intermediary or sponsor in purchasing these boards fell away completely. Now the investigation had to focus exclusively on Eugenia L. herself, the pensioner with unusual generosity toward neighbors and an extremely strange preference for ordering vegetable boxes whose size exactly matched the sizes normally used for other purposes. The police's next steps were directed straight at Eugenia. More than 5 years had passed since the first suspicions, and only now did it become completely obvious that her connection to the events was much deeper and more sinister than the villagers could have suspected. Why did all the elderly female neighbors allow Eugenia so trustingly into their homes late in the evening? With the disappearance of suspicions against Nuno S., the police's attention shifted completely to Eugenia L., the elderly woman around whom the ring of evidence was gradually tightening. Now, the investigation decided to examine more closely the details of the relationships between Eugenia and her neighbors. Women of advanced age who not only allowed her to come to their homes late in the evening, but apparently even expected her visits. The answer emerged partially easily. After a request in the archives of the local parish welfare, the police discovered an important fact. Eugenia had been conducting volunteer work for 15 years. The elderly woman was an official volunteer at Caritas Aveiro, an organization that helps lonely elderly people. Eugenia regularly brought them tea, homemade pastries, and hand-prepared herbal mixtures. Signatures from neighbors and letters of thanks were carefully preserved in the archive and confirmed her long-standing, solid, and even trusting relationships with all those who later became her victims. The police also examined a receipt from 2017 that was notarially certified. Eugenia L. was officially registered as a volunteer and had no complaints during her entire activity. It seemed as if her altruism was impeccable, but the investigation had serious doubts. Was this genuine charity or just a carefully thought-out disguise? Relatives of the victims who were questioned years later remembered a disturbing phrase that Eugenia spoke several times when she poured tea for her neighbors before bedtime. With chamomile, one sleeps like in the womb. At the time, no one paid attention to this. But now, after the series of tragedies, these words took on a completely different meaning. The investigation also checked whether there were other cases where Eugenia's volunteer visits coincided with an unexpected deterioration in the condition of her charges. However, there were no documentary confirmations of such coincidences apart from the already known 4 cases. Each of her visits was received exclusively positively by neighbors and relatives. She was a dear and caring grandmother who never forgot to bring something nice. However, during the course of the investigation, the name of paramedic Enrique C. surfaced again, who had previously been cleared by police. Experts from the forensic laboratory in Aveiro discovered that on Enrique's medical glove, which he used during one of the examinations of a deceased neighbor, microscopic pollen of a plant, known in medical practice as foxglove, was present. In very small doses, it can regulate heart rhythm, but in large quantities, it is poisonous. The police again allowed the possibility that Eugenia might not have acted alone. The paramedic came under special attention. It was decided to check his previous statements and the schedule of his night calls. An additional important detail was provided by the emergency service. Analysis of the dispatcher archive of calls for 2017 to 2018 registered a recurring oddity. The paramedics' calls to each of the 4 women were personally cancelled by Eugenia only 4 to 7 minutes before his arrival. The dispatcher's recordings preserved Eugenia's literal explanations. Blood pressure normal, false alarm. This created for her a crucial time window between cancelling Enrique's arrival and the subsequent morning visit by the district doctor, when no one could have interfered with her actions. This new detail finally led the police to doubt Eugenia's sincerity and selflessness. Now it was obvious that she methodically controlled medical calls and did not allow any strangers into the critically important moment of the night. But why? Now the investigation faced the necessity of understanding whether Enrique C. was really an accomplice or simply became a victim of accidental pollen transfer. For now, this remained an open question. At the same time, investigators were already completely certain that it was precisely Eugenia who possessed the ability to completely control the situation, using the unconditional trust of lonely women who saw in her only a caring helper. On the eve of the important search of Eugenia's shed, the police were clearly aware that it was precisely there that the key to solving this entire chain of strange tragedies might lie, and the volunteer work was only a cover behind which something much darker and more calculated was hidden. What will the police see when they enter the Adega shed? On the night of the 18th of January, the police finally implemented search warrant number SJ007-2024 for Eugenia's shed. The operation began exactly at 2:15 in complete silence, in the light of flashlights and carefully prepared by experts. The investigators recognized that it was precisely here that the final solution was hidden. The entrance door of the Adega shed, which was normally always locked, was carefully broken open. The first thing that members of the forensic group saw when they entered were 4 carefully arranged coffins, covered with perfectly fitted lids of 125 centimeters in size. The coffins belonged to an old training batch from the 1950s, which was once used for training funeral personnel. However, the foundations of each of them were extended to 160 centimeters by boards that Eugenia had bought at the sawmill. The remains of Eugenia's 4 neighbors were neatly laid and dressed with amazing care. Upon examination, it turned out that the clothing sets on them were changed monthly, strictly according to the calendar of Catholic saints. On the floor of the shed lay a thick layer of lime that absorbed moisture and odors, and ventilation grills, artfully built into the roof, ensured constant air circulation and practically complete absence of odors. The investigators documented every detail of the shed with surgical precision. This picture resembled an orderly and well-thought-out exhibition. without visible traces of chaos or haste. Before the investigation stood the logical question of how exactly Eugenia could transport the remains unnoticed to her shed. The investigation team examining the area found the solution to this puzzle. Behind the shed, they discovered a garden wheelbarrow, carefully washed but with clear signs of multiple use. From the wheelbarrow to the entrance of the victims' houses stretched a narrow concrete ramp 14 meters long, cleverly hidden from foreign eyes by dense tuhas. Neighbors who were later questioned noticed not a single suspicious movement, and the nearest surveillance cameras were completely absent. The police conducted a series of experiments and determined that Eugenia needed 90 to 120 seconds to transport each body on the route from house to shed. The weight of the remains, from 38 to 42 kilograms, allowed the task to be accomplished even by a person of advanced age. Another unexpected turn occurred during the examination of the fifth empty coffin. On its inner wall, forensic scientists discovered an unknown female DNA trace. This discovery generated the theory of a possible accomplice of Eugenia whose identity could not be determined in police databases. Despite intensive searching for matches, investigators failed to identify this trace. The version about an unknown accomplice hung in the air, neither confirmed nor refuted at the present time. The next blow to the investigation was the toxicological report from the laboratory in Coimbra. Experts conducted an exhumation and detailed chemical analysis of the remains of 3 of the 4 neighbors. The results were shocking but expected. In each of the samples, a lethal concentration of a substance called digitoxin was found, a derivative of the foxglove plant. Precisely this variety of foxglove grew on Eugenia's flower bed next to her house. Now absolutely all key evidence led to Eugenia. It remained only to legally establish her motives and concrete methods of action. As for paramedic Enrique C., he was definitively removed from the list of suspects. A thorough check confirmed the complete absence of his fingerprints and DNA in the shed. The foxglove pollen previously found on his glove had a logical explanation. In the village pharmacy, Enrique regularly removed his gloves while standing next to the flower bed where precisely this foxglove grew. This fact was officially confirmed by several witnesses, and the investigation excluded his involvement. The investigators now clearly saw the picture, at the center of which stood only Eugenia L., and carefully planned actions that left no doubt about her personal responsibility for what had happened. All that remained was to confirm her motives and methods at the legal level. But Eugenia herself, who silently observed the search from the window of her house, seemed not in the slightest disturbed by the police's appearance. Her face expressed neither fear nor remorse, only cold, calm certainty. The courtroom in Aveiro on the 3rd of October 2024 was full of police officers, journalists, and residents of the village São Jacinto. The judge read the verdict in which Eugenia L., former owner of the funeral business, 96-year-old retiree, was found guilty of 4 episodes of particularly serious crimes, as well as committing desecration of human remains. The court officially confirmed the motive of the crimes. Eugenia was afraid of loneliness and was driven by the pathological belief that the quietly lying girlfriends could never leave her. The mechanism of the crimes that the investigation had constructed based on numerous pieces of evidence was fully confirmed by the court. Eugenia's main weapon was an infusion from the foxglove plant that was grown in her garden. Digitoxin, obtained in this way, causes in large concentrations a blockade of the heart's sinus node, the so-called silent infarction, which is practically impossible to distinguish from natural cardiac arrest without special toxicological expertise. In each of the 4 cases, the scheme was identical and worked out in detail. Eugenia came to the victim in the evening with a thermos of herbal tea to which foxglove infusion had been added. After the tea was drunk, she herself called the ambulance and created a reliable alibi for herself. And then, a few minutes before the paramedics' arrival, she cancelled the call. The sentence was always the same and reassuring. Blood pressure normal, false alarm. These telephone calls were registered in the digital dispatcher archive of the Aveiro Emergency Service, which became the key trail. On the morning of the next day, the district doctor confirmed the natural cause of death, as he had no reason to doubt what had happened. During the past night, Eugenia already had time to transport the neighbor's remains unnoticed to her shed and hide them in a prepared coffin that she had carefully adapted to the needed sizes by buying boards at the San Roque sawmill. The court also noted an important coincidence. The sawmill's bills completely matched the dates of each of the 4 crimes. The final element of the investigation's defense was a thorough analysis of all suspects' alibis. Eugenia's nephew, Nuno S., had an ironclad alibi, documentarily confirmed by data from the metallurgy plant and the Via Verde road service. Paramedic Enrique C. was also completely exonerated. DNA tests, witness interrogations, and detailed investigative experiments confirmed his absolute non-involvement in the events. During the verdict announcement, Eugenia appeared calm and completely indifferent. She showed no emotions and seemed to be not in a courtroom but at some everyday event. The court process was officially completed. Eugenia was placed under constant medical supervision, taking into account her age and her mental condition, which was recognized as limited competence. The shed Adega, now called the girlfriend's room by locals, was sealed and later completely dismantled by police. However, one thread remained unclosed. The investigators could not identify the mysterious female DNA profile that was discovered in the 5th, empty coffin. Despite police efforts, basic checks yielded no matches. The PJ marked this episode as an open case and listed it in the special section of Portugal's unsolved crimes. With this, the Eugenia L. case is officially closed, and the investigation itself went down in the history of Portuguese criminology as one of the most unusual and frighteningly methodical. At the beginning of summer, students throughout Great Britain were eagerly awaiting the end of the school year and the start of holidays. Among them was also Danielle Jones from East Tilbury in Essex County. On the morning of the 18th of June 2001, Danielle prepared for school as usual. Around 7:55, she said goodbye to her family and set off for the bus stop to take the school bus. At 14:30, the telephone rang in the Jones family house. On the other end of the line was Danielle's teacher, who inquired why she had been absent from class. This question struck Danielle's parents like a bolt from the blue. They could not understand why their daughter had not appeared at school. She had no reason to miss class. Daniela Sarah Jones was born in autumn 1985 in Essex County. Her parents, Linda and Tony Jones, lived together with Daniela and her 2 younger brothers in the small village of East Tilbury. Daniela was rather reserved, preferred the comfort of home, and was sometimes shy in the presence of other people. Nevertheless, she possessed an excellent sense of humor and had many friends. Most of all, Daniela loved animals. At home, she had 2 small, fluffy rabbits that she adored above all else. When Daniela's parents received a call from school, this news deeply disturbed them. They thought that even if their daughter had decided to skip class, she would definitely come home before dark. After all, Daniela had always been afraid of being alone at night. Throughout the day, Daniela's relatives and friends tried to reach her. They wrote messages and called her. But there was only silence. This behavior did not fit Daniela at all, which worried everyone even more. Danielle's story left many questions unanswered. She always kept her parents informed about her plans, even if she just wanted to visit the neighbors. Usually she called home as soon as she reached her destination. When it got dark and Danielle was still not back, her relatives became restless and decided to begin searching. Linda Jones stayed home, hoping for a call or her daughter's return. Around midnight, when it became clear that something must have happened to Danielle, the parents turned to the authorities for help. The investigators first questioned the missing person's environment. After it was determined that Danielle had no reason to leave the house and all her things were still in place, it was decided to begin the search immediately. Danielle's younger brother shared a strange observation. In the morning, he had seen through the window how his sister left the house and took the usual path, but then suddenly turned around and went in a different direction. This seemed unusual to him. The search operation was launched in full scale. Investigators, dog handlers with tracking dogs, relatives and friends set off along Danielle's usual route that she normally took to school. The mother barely closed her eyes all night. She waited for her daughter to come through the door at any moment as usual. Over the next 3 days, the family searched every corner of the house but found nothing significant. However, they managed to find people who had seen the missing girl that morning. A couple of students noticed how she went to the store next to the bus stop. It turned out that she never got on the school bus. Soon, the search operations expanded. The police went from house to house in the small town. The investigators spoke with all residents and asked them to check their sheds and outbuildings. At the same time, the response from society was overwhelming. Everyone tried to support the family, and many locals participated in the search themselves. But even after several days of intensive searching, no traces could be found. The relatives and close ones of the missing person were desperate. Nevertheless, they continued to believe that their beloved daughter was alive and would soon return home. The local law enforcement recognized the seriousness of the situation regarding missing Danielle and transferred the case to the Central Investigation Group. They appointed a special officer as a liaison to the family. His task was to support the relatives throughout the entire investigation and promptly provide them with new information. The officer was supposed to build a trusting relationship with Danielle's relatives in order to better understand the atmosphere in the family and create a profile of the missing person. During the conversation, the parents expressed concerns regarding their daughter's relationship with her uncle. Stuart Campbell, the husband of Tony Jones's sister, was close to Danielle. This 43-year-old construction worker and father of 2 children often spent time with his niece and her brothers when they were younger. He played with them and treated them like his own children. In conversation with an investigator, Mrs. Jones shared her observations about Stuart. According to her words, he gave the impression of a person with excessive self-esteem, although he also possessed a certain charisma. Her husband Tony maintained a friendly relationship with him, but occasionally confessed to his wife that there was something about Stuart that triggered a vague uneasiness in him. Over time, Stuart began to pay increased attention to Daniela, his niece. He got into the habit of picking her up after class and offering her a ride. This caused Daniela discomfort, especially due to the curious looks from her classmates. Stuart frequently invited her to the cinema and cafe and persistently tried to hold her hand during walks. Stuart's visits to the Jones family house became too frequent, up to 4 or 5 times per week. Finally, Linda and Tony decided to restrict his stay with them. Tony remembered an incident when Stuart, sitting next to Daniela on the sofa, persistently asked why she was so embarrassed and blushing. When Tony heard this conversation, he decided to intervene and asked Stuart what was wrong. Campbell, however, immediately waved it off, explained that everything was fine, and immediately moved to another seat. After the conversation with the authority representative, Danielle's parents shared that only now they were beginning to understand. Behind Stuart's behavior, there might be more than the usual relationship between uncle and niece. It seemed as if Danielle had tried to stay away from him. Linda and Tony admitted that they had previously explained his actions with sincere affection and the desire to be closer to their family, and everything that seemed strange to them, they attributed to harmless misunderstandings. They tried not to pay too much attention to it, fearing that it could seriously damage family relationships if their suspicions proved unfounded. After all, Tony's biological sister was Stuart's wife. One day after Danielle stopped responding, Tony decided to visit his relative. However, the house greeted him with silence. When he looked through the window, he surprisingly noticed a video surveillance system in the living room, which seemed unusual to him. Even stranger, however, was Stuart Campbell's behavior when Tony finally met him. He seemed completely indifferent to Danielle's disappearance. Moreover, Stuart was the only one who showed no interest in searching for her. At the same time, local media continued to report intensively on the disappearance of Danielle Jones. Given the growing public interest, law enforcement representatives decided to organize a meeting with journalists to provide official information about the case. At a meeting with journalists, investigators shared details about how Danielle had disappeared. They asked viewers of local news to report any information that could help with the search. This step proved successful. Numerous calls began coming into the police station. One of them particularly interested the investigators. An eyewitness reported that on the morning when Danielle was last seen, he had noticed a similar-looking girl. She was standing next to a blue delivery van and arguing loudly with a man. Interestingly, Danielle's uncle, Stuart Campbell, owned a similar blue delivery van. This detail aroused serious suspicions in the police. Fears arose that Campbell might have kidnapped his niece in an unknown direction. Before the investigators invited the suspicious person for questioning, they decided to examine his past. What they discovered caused them great concern. It turned out that this person had attracted the attention of law enforcement many years earlier. At the end of the 80s, he was arrested for inappropriate behavior toward a young person. He confessed his guilt but got away with a suspended sentence and left the courthouse as a free person. Both Linda and Tony knew that their new relative had had problems with the law in the past. But when they tried to find out details, Stuart deflected and assured them it had been trivial matters. He convinced everyone that he had become a victim of slander, since the court had ultimately acquitted him. Further investigation led to shocking revelations. The police uncovered about 30 cases in which Stuart Campbell's name appeared. It turned out that over many years, he had lured young women to his place by posing as a trendy photographer. Once he was alone with them, he forced them to participate in questionable photo shoots and claimed they were shots for glossy magazines. Given Campbell's past and his unusual relationship with the missing Danielle, the investigators had to either clear suspicion against him or find evidence of his possible involvement in his niece's mysterious disappearance. Since Danielle could not be found, the investigators developed the theory that Stuart Campbell might be holding her against her will at an unknown location. They organized surveillance in the hope that he might lead them to the missing person's whereabouts. However, his behavior only reinforced the law enforcement agency's suspicions. He did not show the concern one would expect from an uncle whose niece had disappeared without a trace. Instead, Campbell strangely spent time in parking lots, photographing cars that resembled his own silver Nissan. When it became clear that surveillance was not bringing the desired results, the investigators decided to arrest Campbell. On the 23rd of June, 5 days after Danielle Jones's disappearance, Stuart Campbell was taken into custody. During questioning by the investigators, Campbell was immediately made to understand that they had valid reasons to believe he knew about the situation with Danielle. However, Stuart immediately began denying everything and claimed to have no idea where she was. Furthermore, he insisted he had a close and trusting relationship with his niece. According to Stuart, Danielle's relationships with her parents, Tony and Linda Jones, had deteriorated as she got older. He told them that he acted as a mediator between Danielle and her parents to help the Jones family avoid a breakdown, as according to his statement, they were on the verge of falling apart. In the course of the conversation, it emerged that Stuart Campbell had a watertight alibi. At the time of Danielle's disappearance, he was not in Eastleborough. He had driven to the neighboring town to get building materials to help his neighbor with renovation work. He had no receipt because that store did not have the needed goods. On the way back, he stopped to call his wife and tell her this. After returning home, he immediately went to his neighbor to continue with the renovation work. The story with the case of Danielle Jones left many questions unanswered. Despite Campbell's dubious alibis, law enforcement could not find sufficient grounds for his continued detention. He was released on bail until the investigation was completed. Given Campbell's past, the prospect of his release caused the investigators considerable concern. They suspected he might pose a danger but had no solid evidence to file charges. In this context, it was decided to search the Jones family house again. When searching Danielle's room, they found a pencil case with 2 notes. The first read, "Hello, Princess. In case you didn't notice my previous messages, I decided to leave another one. I want you to know, I miss your smile. Kisses." When the investigators showed Linda Jones these notes, she was shocked and declared she was seeing them for the first time. She told them that the entire Jones family had gone on vacation a few weeks before Danielle's mysterious disappearance. Linda suspected that Stuart might have broken into Danielle's room in their absence and left these messages. Danielle's father remembered an important detail. Before their departure, Campbell had installed a new back door in their house. Suspicion arose that he could have made himself a spare key for the new door precisely at that time. The investigations led to the necessity of examining the Stuart Campbell family house. After obtaining the appropriate permission, the investigators began the inspection. A variety of photographic equipment was discovered in the house, which in itself did not arouse suspicion. However, the findings took a disturbing turn. Among Campbell's personal items, pictures were found that caused concern. The photographs of young people were of an inappropriate nature and seemed to have been taken with the homeowner's own camera. Furthermore, pictures of similar content were found that had been downloaded from the internet. The most disturbing discoveries awaited the investigators in the attic. In a double bag were items that gave cause for unpleasant thoughts: underwear, restraint devices, and adult toys. Particular attention was drawn to a pair of white stockings with barely visible traces that were sent for further examination. During the inspection, a blue delivery van belonging to Campbell was also confiscated. Stuart Campbell claimed he had information that Danielle had not disappeared, but had decided herself to leave the house due to constant disagreements between her parents. To confirm his statement, he presented the investigators with a message allegedly received from Danielle's number on the day of her disappearance. It read, "Hello, Stu. Thank you. You are forever the best uncle. Tell Mama, I'm so sorry." This information gave Danielle's parents hope that their daughter was hiding somewhere. However, they were extremely disturbed that she had not contacted them until now and had not returned. A text analysis specialist examined the alleged message from Danielle. He determined that it was written in capital letters, although Danielle normally used lowercase letters. The investigators requested data from Campbell's mobile service provider. It turned out that the call Campbell allegedly made to his wife when he returned from the hardware store on the day of Danielle's disappearance was made from Eastleborough, and not from where Campbell claimed to have been. But most remarkable was that the signals from Campbell's and Danielle Jones's mobile devices were located near Campbell's house and remained active for another 30 hours after her disappearance. 30 days after Danielle Jones had broken contact, her concerned relatives turned to the public through the media. They hoped to find new clues and any information that could shed light on the matter. The family called on everyone who might know something or might have seen Danielle, but for some reason had not yet reported this to the authorities to finally share the information they knew. After some time, Jones's relatives, together with law enforcement representatives, distributed about 1,500 flyers with photos of Danielle. In parallel, the investigators received the results of the examination of the white stockings found in Stuart Campbell's attic. The experts' conclusions were disturbing. Traces were found on the clothing item that were connected to both Campbell and Danielle Jones. Based on the collected data, Stuart Campbell was taken into custody without the possibility of release on bail. He was brought to the station where he was accused of possessing inappropriate images. However, this charge served only as a formal reason for the arrest and allowed investigators to continue the investigation and prepare more serious charges in connection with Danielle Jones's disappearance. A relative of the suspect visited him shortly after his arrest. After a conversation with him, the relative informed law enforcement that he was deeply convinced that the arrested man was telling lies. It also turned out that the suspect kept records that investigators would later call the missing person's diary. He noted there every interaction with her, whether it was a phone call or a sent message. These records made it clear that he was excessively fascinated with her. Despite the lack of clear evidence for the disappearance, investigators had gathered enough indications to bring charges for involvement in the mysterious disappearance. After the charges were filed, the suspect remained under observation by law enforcement authorities for almost a year. During this time, more than 500 reports came in from across Great Britain and Europe, claiming that the missing person was allegedly well. This caused considerable difficulties for local police, as each of these reports required thorough verification. Had there been even the slightest possibility that she was still somewhere and this report had gone unnoticed? This could have been a weighty argument for Campbell's lawyers in court. In the months before the trial began, efforts to find Danielle were significantly intensified. It was not only about finding key evidence for the investigation, but also about providing her relatives with the much-needed spiritual comfort. 12 days before the start of Campbell's trial, human remains were discovered. Investigators determined that they belonged to the missing student named Millie Dowler. As later turned out, a certain Levi Belfield was involved in her disappearance. He would have to answer for his actions a whole decade after the discovery of Millie's remains. On the 14th of October 2002, the trial against Stuart Campbell began, the man who was married to the sister of Danielle's father. Linda and Tony Jones trusted him. He presented himself as a caring relative. Stuart Campbell's story raised numerous questions. He was accused of a serious offense against Danielle Jones. However, Campbell appeared confident and unconcerned in the face of the charges brought, as he knew that Danielle had not been found. Investigators suspected that Campbell secretly communicated with Danielle without informing Tony and Linda. It seemed as if he had been very fascinated with her and had tried to sow discord between the girl and her parents. Danielle was last seen talking to someone in a blue van that resembled Campbell's vehicle. On Campbell's attic, a pair of white stockings with his and Danielle's DNA was found. His personal records revealed an unhealthy interest in young people. An important piece of evidence were messages allegedly sent by Danielle. An investigation revealed that Campbell himself was the author and was trying to mislead the investigation. Mobile service provider data refuted his alibi. Throughout the entire court trial, Campbell maintained silence. He only occasionally passed notes to his defenders when something didn't suit him. After almost 3 months of proceedings, the jury delivered their verdict. Stuart Campbell was found guilty and sentenced to a long prison term, with the possibility of review after 20 years. Until 2019, Danielle Jones's whereabouts remained unknown. Linda Jones supported an initiative in memory of Helen McCourt, whose fate took a tragic turn. This proposal was intended to restrict the rights of those who withhold important information from investigators. Helen worked at an insurance company when her life came to an abrupt end in 1988. Ian Sims, the man connected to her disappearance, never revealed all the circumstances of the case. The call for passing a new law gathered over 100,000 signatures and found support at the highest government level. In the year 2021, a book titled My Relative with a Dark Past saw the light of day, whose author was Alex Sharkey, Stuart Campbell's brother. In this work, Alex openly shared the story of his life alongside his brother and described in detail the events that followed the mysterious disappearance of Danielle Jones. When 2 decades had passed since Danielle's disappearance, Essex law enforcement authorities organized a memorial event in her honor. Investigators assured Danielle's relatives that they would not give up hope and would continue the search so that the family could find peace and close this sad chapter of their lives. Many believe that in the company of other people one is protected by public attention. Statistics confirm this theory. However, one should not forget that wrongdoers can use various tricks to lure someone to a lonely place. Therefore, it is important to remain vigilant even in busy places. In picturesque Andria, an Italian city with about 100,000 inhabitants, the story of the local Mansi family attracted public attention. The city was famous for its historical heritage, especially for the majestic castle Castel del Monte, which attracted many travelers daily. For the locals, tourism became the main source of income. Not far from the famous castle lived the Mansi family, the parents and their only long-awaited daughter, Graziela. For the last 10 years, the family owned a small retail shop that was conveniently located on the path to the main gate of the castle. Here they offered tourists nuts and dried fruits. The business was successful. Graziela often helped in the family business despite her age, which pleased her parents very much. In the busy tourist street, there were always many visitors, and additional hands were very welcome. The young woman participated with joy in the common business and attracted customers through her friendliness and energy. Saturday, the 19th of August 2000, was no different from ordinary weekends with their maximum tourist influx. On such days, Graziela's grandfather often stood behind the counter. The granddaughter gladly kept him company and handled small tasks. Because of the constant stream of visitors, the grandfather could rarely leave the shop. Around 7 o'clock in the evening, the elderly man who had become tired asked his granddaughter to go to the fountain and fill a small bottle with water. Graziela readily agreed and set off for the fountain, which was only 5 minutes away. Time passed, but Graziela did not return. The grandfather began to worry. Although at first he calmed himself with the thought that his granddaughter might have met acquaintances and gotten into conversation. However, when more than 20 minutes had passed and Graziela, who was always punctual, did not appear, the man became seriously worried. He decided to check the situation and went to the fountain. To his surprise and concern, Graziela was neither there nor in the neighboring streets, which he thoroughly walked while searching for his granddaughter. The situation became increasingly tense. When the grandfather returned to the shop hoping to find Graziela, he discovered that she still had not appeared. She could have taken another route, but she was nowhere to be seen. After about 30 minutes, he made contact with his son and daughter-in-law, began calling all friends and acquaintances whose numbers he had noted. The parents also called everyone they could reach, but no one had seen her. Soon the whole family and some of Graziela's friends gathered at the Mansi shop on the square. Without losing time, adults and teenagers organized search groups. Their activity attracted the attention of passers-by and tourists, many of whom immediately joined the search. The relatives brought a photo of Graziela and showed it to passers-by. Some confirmed having seen her during the day and evening. However, no one could say where she had gone or what might have happened. The area was considered quiet. Incidents rarely occurred here. It seemed unimaginable that something could happen in such a busy place. After several hours of unsuccessful searching, the Mansi family contacted the local police. The officers immediately joined the search. After some time, a resident approached one of the patrol officers with disturbing information. He had heard a scream from the wooded area near Castel del Monte Castle. 2 carabinieri headed in the indicated direction and noticed smoke rising from the center of the plantation. At first, they did not connect this with the disappearance, but decided to check the source of the fire and assess the need for fire department intervention. As they approached the location to about 10 meters, the police noticed an unusual smell. The fire source looked strange. Under a layer of dry leaves, they noticed something concerning. Due to the size and clothing that matched the description of Graziela's outfit, the police had to recognize with heavy hearts that their worst suspicions had been confirmed. When they discovered the crime scene, it was already too late to change anything. In examining the forest area, investigators discovered several fragments of clothing and a device for fire ignition, the suspected source of the fire. No further clues about the perpetrators were found. A more thorough examination of the terrain was required. The authorities also hoped to obtain recordings from surveillance cameras installed near the castle. The medical examination confirmed the identity of the person found. It was Graziela Mansi. The specialists could not exhaustively answer all questions of the investigation and the family. The condition complicated the investigation, however, the expert opinion confirmed the intentional character of the incident. Information about this incident spread lightning fast through news channels. The next day, press representatives literally besieged the Mansi family house. When the relatives were informed about what had happened, they initially refused to believe that it was Graziela. This inexplicable case shocked the residents so much that the entire district was in a state of shock. The media reported intensively about the incident near the famous castle. Society was disturbed by what had happened. The tourist flow decreased significantly. Visitors considered the area unsafe and avoided the attraction, which negatively affected Andria's tourism sector. The investigators acted quickly. The police actively engaged in the work from the first hours. The main version was that a perpetrator led Graziela from the walking path to a deserted place and then set a fire to erase traces. In Graziela's environment, there could obviously be no serious adversaries, therefore they searched for an adult person. The investigation pursued several versions. First, they checked lists of people with criminal backgrounds who could be in the region. However, this investigative line gradually lost significance. They even examined tourist data. It was suspected that the perpetrator could be a traveler who selected random passers-by. Over time, this version also appeared increasingly unlikely. When questioning witnesses, friends and acquaintances of the Mansi family, the name Pasquale Tartoro was mentioned more and more frequently. This 20-year-old young man was known throughout the entire area. He worked unofficially as a parking attendant on the street where the Mansi family shop was located. Many noticed Pasquale's strange behavior. Since Graziela helped in her relative's shop, he constantly observed her. His gaze disturbed the surroundings. Several witnesses pointed to this circumstance, which attracted the special attention of investigators. The authorities' conversations with Pasquale's friends confirmed the disturbing suspicions. The question arose: could Pasquale be an obsessed stalker? The relatives categorically rejected this possibility. According to their words, he grew up in a well-protected family and never got into conflict with the law. At least until that fateful evening at Castel del Monte. Despite his relatives' assurances, however, Pasquale became the main person in the case. At the meeting with investigators, the suspicions only intensified. His t-shirt was stained with suspicious dark red spots and earth, as if he had been digging in the ground for a long time. Traces of resistance were visible on his face. The investigators noted that the scratches were superficial, as if they had been left by tender fingers. Pasquale denied his involvement in a person's disappearance, but the longer the conversations with investigators lasted, the more frequently his version of events changed. After several hours at the police station, Pasquale began to give in. His statement about Graziela's beauty caused particular concern among investigators. This is how he spoke about the student. Many inconsistencies accumulated in the suspect's accounts, who obviously tried to hide something from the police. In one version, Pasquale claimed he had been in that forest by chance during a walk where he saw a motionless person. Out of fear, he ran away, and shortly after the police appeared. Later, his story was supplemented with new details. He told how he met Graziela at the well, where she had come to fetch water. She was not afraid of him, had seen him often before. Until that day, he always appeared calm and appropriate. Pasquale confessed that he lured her into the forest with a story about puppies that had allegedly recently been born to a local dog. When he was finally convicted, he confessed to the incident and claimed he wanted to cover up the traces. The young man insisted that there were no other motives and described what happened as a game that got out of control. The media actively illuminated every detail of the incident, adding rumors and unverified particulars. This created confusion. The true motives of the perpetrator remained unclear. The story with Pasquale's statements took an unexpected turn. Law enforcement tried to obtain a credible version of events. In his story, there were many inconsistencies, obvious contradictions to the evidence found. Although he shared the details of events and other important information with the Carabinieri, many key questions about the incident and its causes remained unanswered. It was established that the fire began around 22 o'clock, but the disappearance was noticed almost 3 hours earlier. What happened during all this time? Pasquale explained his actions by saying he heard voices. Near the forest, people were passing by. He thought the search for the missing person had begun. The medical expert's opinion caused particular concern. In his opinion, Graziela Mansi was conscious at the time of the fire. The Carabinieri continued working with the suspect. Questions arose as to why he had only insignificant scratches under these circumstances. Doubts arose that he acted alone. Possibly there were other participants as well. It was decided to conduct a re-interrogation. Finally, Pasquale agreed to cooperate with the investigators and tell the truth that he had previously concealed out of fear. According to his words, he did not bring Graziela to the forest on his own initiative. A group of young men aged 18 to 20 forced him to do so. In the forest, Giuseppe Di Bari, Vincenzo Caratello, Domenico Margiotto and Michele Zagaria were waiting. Pasquale claimed that originally there were no other intentions. He had a conflict with these young men, in which he lost. As compensation, the acquaintances demanded that Graziela be brought to the forest, which he did. The four young men held Graziela for several hours. When they heard the search calls, they became afraid of the consequences. The group decided to hide the traces of the incident. They had no suitable materials to erase the evidence. When Graziela came to and began to scream, the young men panicked and tried to use violence. Finally, they covered her with leaves and tried to think about how they could hide their actions, whereupon they decided to use an ignition device. All participants were between 18 and 20 years old. As it turned out, the young men came from wealthy families and not from a problematic environment, which made their act even more incomprehensible. Acquaintances described them as balanced and reasonable young people who had never shown aggression or a tendency toward legal violations. Only one of them had small problems with the law in the past, a minor theft. Following Pasquale's statements, law enforcement quickly arrested the entire group. The news shook all of Italy and received broad media attention. Since their arrest, the suspects denied any involvement in Graziela's disappearance and protested that they did not understand the reasons for the authorities' interest in them. However, the investigators were determined to continue their work until they had reconstructed the complete picture of the events of that evening in the forest. In examining these young men, investigators found, unlike Pasquale, no visible traces of the incident. Their clothing was clean, and they showed no injuries. Searches of their homes brought no results. Nothing suspicious was found. During interrogations, they stubbornly insisted on their innocence, but confirmed that Pasquale Tartoro indeed harbored strange feelings for Graziela. Despite long conversations with investigators, none of them changed their statement. At this point, they were released but remained under observation as suspects. An interesting detail came to light later. These four young men were among those who carried the ceremonial coffin at Graziela's farewell. This happened before Pasquale made his statement. Eyewitnesses reported that the young men showed sincere emotions, as if they felt deep sorrow. During interrogations, they explained their reaction by saying they knew Graziela, though not closely, but they often saw her in the Mansi family business. The investigators developed the theory that the presence of all four at the ceremony was no coincidence. Despite lacking close acquaintance with the family, they might have felt inner discomfort, or tried to understand how far the investigation had progressed and whether there were suspicions against them. The ceremony gathered almost the entire city. Even some tourists came. In such a crowd, four emotional young men attracted no special attention. When they were again asked to the station, each was spoken to individually. Vincenzo and Giuseppe claimed to have an alibi. They explained that they were at the local gaming club around 7 o'clock on the day of the disappearance. Michele and Domenico, on the other hand, refused to speak with investigators and demanded the presence of lawyers. This behavior only increased law enforcement's interest in these persons. The investigators began checking Vincenzo and Giuseppe's alibi. At the computer club, their presence was confirmed, but only for the first hour. The further whereabouts of the friends remained unknown. which raised questions for the investigative authorities. The case took an unexpected turn when Michelle and Domenico decided to tell their version of events. Their story largely matched Pasquale Tartoro's statements. According to their words, the friends met in the forest in the evening, allegedly for a game. At the time of their arrival, the entire group was already on site. Pasquale was supposed to bring Graziela. The other participants hid behind trees and waited for their appearance. It took them about 15 to 20 minutes to reach the forest. At this time, the grandfather had presumably already begun searching for his granddaughter. When they arrived at the location, the other participants jumped out of their hiding places. Graziela was trapped. The group was under the influence of alcohol. They amused themselves at how much Graziela was frightened. According to the arrested person's statements, they only wanted to play with the defenseless Graziela. Graziela was so frightened that she fell into paralysis. In one moment, the situation got out of control. After the fall, she lost consciousness. The young people claimed they had originally only intended to frighten her. When she no longer responded to address, everyone became aware of the seriousness of the situation. At this moment, they heard voices, presumably from those searching for Graziela. Under the influence of alcohol, they decided to hide the traces of the incident. The suspect's statements were partially confirmed by evidence. The medical examination proved ambiguous. Graziela had certain injuries, but their manner of origin could not be precisely determined. The young woman's clothing was in place, which called some original investigation versions into question. The difficulty also lay in the fact that traces of fire exposure significantly complicated the expert's work. The Carabinieri suspected that the group of young people might have intentionally used flames to hide the traces of their actions. The story of the dangerous game that the arrested told aroused serious doubts. The investigators carefully examined all circumstances of the incident, trying to establish the true course of events. Meanwhile, the arrested continued to claim that everything happened by chance. The final decision was to be made by the court. Two from the group, Vincenzo and Giuseppe, categorically denied their involvement. According to their words, they simply came to the forest at Pasquale's invitation without suspecting his intentions. When they saw what was happening, they allegedly left immediately. The young men explained that they had not contacted the police out of fear of possible revenge from other participants or problems with the law. They could have been accused of complicity. After completion of the court proceedings, Pasquale Tartoro received a relatively mild sentence, 30 years imprisonment. Two factors contributed to this: his willingness to cooperate with investigators and the fact that expert analysis did not confirm his direct participation in the final events. The four other participants received a stricter sentence. For kidnapping a minor and intentional actions, they received life imprisonment in solitary cells without the right to contact other prisoners. The sentencing provoked violent reactions. Graziela's mother lost consciousness. Her husband had to be helped. A verbal altercation arose between the families of the accused. The young woman's relatives considered the punishment just, except in Pasquale's case. In their opinion, he deserved a harsher sentence. Vincenzo and Giuseppe were particularly active in opposing the court decision. They defended their innocence so convincingly that they even found supporters who believed their version of events. However, this did not help them challenge the verdict. 8 years after these events, 27-year-old Vincenzo Caratello made a fateful decision during his stay in the correctional facility. Perhaps he was tormented by guilt, or simply saw no other way out. Just a few days before, his mother had visited him. The woman continued to believe unshakably in her son's innocence and supported him in every way. However, Vincenzo himself had already lost all will to continue his path at that time. The mother's heart sensed that something was wrong. She noticed that her son had become distant, had become a different person, and her premonitions proved correct. On the 19th of June 2013, lawyer Michel filed a motion to review the case, citing procedural violations. He challenged the results of the previous proceedings, but the court refused to consider the motion. Pasquale's mother publicly addressed the Mansi family with sincere apologies for her son's actions. She emphasized that he must take full responsibility for his actions before the law. However, Graziela's mother rejected these apologies. Her response was emotional. She declared that Pasquale must go through everything that her daughter had gone through. According to her words, Graziela would have stayed with her family if he had not lured her into the forest. Graziela's parents held Pasquale particularly responsible as the main culprit. The name Graziela Mansi is not forgotten in Italy. At Castel del Monte Castle stands a memorial plaque with her photo and a short story of Graziela, whose path ended so early. This place became a kind of memorial site where locals and tourists leave flowers and stuffed animals. Graziela's relatives frequently visit this place of remembrance. After 24 years of imprisonment, Pasquale Tartoro gained his freedom. For good behavior, his sentence was reduced by 6 years. Now he is 44 and trying to start a new life. It is difficult to predict how his further fate will develop. Among all participants, he was the only one who agreed to a simplified procedure which led to sentence reduction. After the incident, all participants broke off all contact with each other. Even when Pasquale was released, none of the former friends tried to restore contact. He himself says that he remembers every day what happened and the pain he caused Graziela and her relatives. Pasquale confesses, if he could return to the past, he would act differently. In the difficult rehabilitation phase, his family became the most important support. He expresses gratitude to everyone who believed in his improvement. However, Graziela's mother expressed her opinion about Pasquale's early release. According to her words, his release destroyed the idea of justice. She is convinced that such people cannot change and pose a danger to society, which is why they do not deserve a second chance. Vincenzo and Giuseppe, who insisted on their innocence, could not understand Pasquale's motives for action. In his last letter before leaving this world, Vincenzo continued to defend his innocence and expressed his bitterness about the injustice of the system. He hoped that someday someone would be found who could prove the truth, but saw no sense himself in continuing the fight for freedom. Giuseppe, Domenico, and Michele are still in custody. Giuseppe does not give up his attempts to prove his innocence and devotes his time to Bible study. He has accepted his sentence and no longer files appeals. At the same time, he maintains faith that the truth will come to light one day. All three unanimously point to Pasquale as the main culprit of the incident. According to their words, he lured Graziela into the forest and was the initiator of further events. Nevertheless, Pasquale received the mildest sentence among all the convicted and is already free.